Everyone is sharing, but some stay unseen, not because they have nothing to show, but because they've learnt the quiet value of being unseen. Scroll through your feed, and you'll find a familiar rhythm: smiling faces, filtered sunsets, breakfasts arranged like art. Reflective, each post, a gentle declaration: I exist, I matter, look at me. It's beautiful, in its own way, this collective need to be witnessed. And yet, somewhere between the noise of stories and hashtags, there are people who choose silence. They scroll, they observe, they exist quietly, without announcing it. No selfies, no daily updates, just presence, unposted. So it makes you wonder, in a world obsessed with being visible, why do some of us choose to disappear? Is it resistance, protection, or something deeper, a different way of belonging that doesn't need to be seen to be real? This isn't about judgment. It's an exploration of what it means to exist quietly, in a time that rewards visibility above all else. We live in the era of eyes, a time where posting has quietly become proof of existence. To be online is to be seen, and to be seen is to feel real. It's not vanity, it's psychology. According to social validation theory, human beings are wired to seek belonging through recognition. Long before social media, we looked for cues, a nod, a smile, a glance to confirm we mattered. Today, that validation loop happens through numbers: likes, views, shares. Each click mirrors the same neural reward that once came from human connection. But somewhere along the way, recognition became performance. We began to curate rather than connect, crafting ideal versions of ourselves for the digital gaze. Sociologist Irving Goffman called this the self-presentation theory, the idea that we're all actors on social stages, managing impressions to be accepted. And yet, even actors get tired. That exhaustion is what psychologists now call digital identity fatigue, the burnout that comes from maintaining a version of ourselves for others to consume. So what happens when someone quietly steps off that stage? What does it mean when they stop performing and simply opt out? Every time we post a photo and watch the likes appear, our brain releases a small pulse of dopamine, the same chemical tied to pleasure and reward. It's a feedback loop, subtle but powerful, that tells us, you are seen, you are accepted. Over time, this cycle can become addictive, not in a moral sense, but in a neurological one. Our minds begin to equate visibility with value. This is where self-esteem theory divides the road. Some people build their sense of worth externally, shaped by feedback, approval, and visibility. Others develop it internally, through what psychologists call intrinsic motivation, a self-concept rooted in who they are, not in how they are perceived. For the second group, confidence isn't a reaction, it's a foundation. It's quiet, stable, and doesn't fluctuate with algorithms. When your confidence is rooted within, you no longer need a mirror made of likes to know who you are. Those who don't post their photos often fall into this category, not because they dislike attention, but because they've already found their reflection elsewhere, in purpose, in relationships, in private moments that don't need an audience to be real. Privacy isn't just a preference, it's a form of psychological safety. According to privacy boundary theory, every person regulates how much of themselves they reveal to the world. These invisible boundaries aren't about secrecy, they're about balance, about knowing when exposure stops feeling like expression and starts feeling like intrusion. In today's hyper-connected world, those boundaries are harder to maintain. Every photo, every tag, every story leaves behind a data trail, a digital footprint that rarely disappears. For some, that awareness creates a quiet unease, the feeling that every moment shared is one less moment that truly belongs to them. And in a culture where surveillance is constant, from algorithms to advertisers, choosing not to post becomes a subtle act of information control. It's about protecting peace. This instinct is especially strong among older generations who grew up before the era of oversharing. To them, privacy still carries dignity, a quiet grace in keeping some things unseen. They don't measure connection by visibility, but by trust. And in a digital landscape that rewards exposure, that restraint becomes a rare form of wisdom. the art of keeping what matters untouched by the crowd. For some, the hesitation to post isn't about privacy or indifference, it's about protection. Psychologists call it evaluation apprehension, the fear of being observed, judged, or misunderstood. When your image becomes public, it also becomes open to interpretation, and that can feel like standing beneath a spotlight, with no control over how the audience will react. Social media magnifies this fear. It turns self-expression into comparison. Social comparison theory explains how we naturally measure ourselves against others, their beauty, confidence, lifestyle, often without realizing it. Over time, this can feed perfectionism and body image anxiety, quietly convincing people that anything less than flawless isn't worth sharing. And then there's the quieter ache of the imposter phenomenon, the inner voice that says, you don't belong here, even when you do. For some, not posting becomes a form of armor, not against people, but against exposure itself. They're not avoiding the world, they're avoiding the feeling of being dissected by it. In a culture that critiques faster than it connects, choosing invisibility isn't cowardice, it's self-preservation, a way of keeping one's sense of worth intact, beyond the fragile theater of public opinion. Introversion is often mistaken for shyness, but they're not the same. Carl Jung described introversion as an orientation of energy, not a fear of people, but a limit to how much stimulation one can comfortably process. For introverts, every interaction, even digital, draws from a finite reserve. And when that energy runs low, retreat isn't avoidance, it's recovery. In this sense, posting is not a neutral act. Each upload invites comments, reactions, visibility, all of which demand subtle emotional energy. For extroverts, that exchange feels enlivening. For introverts, it can feel like standing on a stage with bright lights and open seats. Psychologists call this cognitive overstimulation, when the brain receives more input than it can meaningfully absorb. Over time, this leads to what some researchers term parasocial exposure fatigue, the exhaustion of being perceived by an unseen audience. So silence becomes a boundary, not a void, a form of social energy management that restores balance. For these individuals, posting less isn't a rejection of connection, it's a recalibration of safety. Their quiet is not emptiness, it's maintenance. A way of returning to equilibrium in a world that rarely stops watching. Some people refuse to let their image speak for them, not out of rebellion, but out of quiet integrity. They sense something fragile in the way the internet turns identity into performance, a version of the self that must always be polished, edited, and approved before it's shared. Psychologist Carl Rogers called this the pursuit of congruence, the alignment between the authentic self and the presented self. When those two drift apart, we begin to feel disconnected from our own truth. Online, that gap widens easily. Every filter, caption, and pose becomes a small negotiation between who we are and who we want others to see. For some, that negotiation feels unbearable. They fear that the more they curate, the less real they become, that the digital persona slowly erases the texture of the authentic self. So they step back. They reclaim their identity from the endless scroll, choosing presence over projection. Their silence is not emptiness, it's alignment, an act of identity integrity in a culture built on performance. Because sometimes to not post is the purest act of honesty, a quiet reminder that being real is not the same as being visible. Maybe not posting isn't avoidance at all. Maybe it's strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself. In a world where everyone is broadcasting, choosing silence is a quiet declaration. I exist, even when unseen. They don't need to be seen to exist. They exist fully, even in silence. There's a rare kind of peace in that, the kind that comes from no longer needing to prove, perform, or perfect. Like still water that reflects without distortion, their worth is steady, unshaken by visibility. Because peace, not visibility, is becoming the new form of confidence. And maybe those who stay unseen aren't behind, they're simply ahead of their time, reminding us that presence doesn't always need an audience, and that sometimes the most powerful statement is simply stillness. So now ask yourself, do you post to connect or to be seen? There's no right answer, only awareness. Because every photo, every silence, reveals something about how we wish to exist in this world. If this made you pause or see yourself differently, share your psychology below. We're all learning how to be human here. And maybe, just maybe, being unseen isn't loneliness. Maybe it's freedom.